Well, good evening and welcome to the Sunday night evening broadcast of the Church Safety Guys. I am joined by my fellow church safety guys.
How are you, James?
So Paul's kind of had a crazy day. I've kind of had a crazy day, but we're here. So how was your day, Mike?
Let's say I was doing some painting, but yeah, pretty not a restful day.
Fun times. So yeah, some of you might know, some of you probably don't care to know, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I ended up having surgery on my foot this past week. And so I've been kind of hobbling around and actually had it done on Thursday. And so interestingly enough, I think it ended up being worse than they were originally anticipating. So now I've got it wrapped up with 18 layers and I'm stationed on my couch with an ice pack. So lots of fun. The plus side to this is I get to sit though, and this is bringing stuff back to norm, and I get to listen to Paul make corny jokes about me not being able to stand on my feet and dancing to the intro music and all that fun stuff. So
yes, you guys wish you could see the behind the scenes. Just saying.
Yeah, right. So tonight we're gonna jump in. We're gonna get started. We're gonna talk about some fire safety stuff. Before we do, I do want to just mention real quick that we're still doing the To Protect and Serve fundraiser, and I'll bring that up so that you guys can kind of see what we have going on with that. But basically, we're still doing the buy a book, give a book. So when you purchase a book directly through us instead of through Amazon, we actually take that additional amount for that purchase, and we put it toward purchasing books to donate to local law enforcement, and then also police departments and chaplains around the U.S. So it's been a great ministry. We're still doing that fundraiser. So if you're interested in partnering with us with that or jumping in and do that, we definitely appreciate it. We've even had folks make gracious donations that were, I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I'm just going to donate so that you can give them out to departments that need them, etc. So we've had a really good response with them, and they're definitely getting passed out, which is great because they have some great content in it, the gospel message that's getting passed out. And so it's definitely been a blessing. So thank you. If you have already jumped in on that fundraiser, thanks for being part of that. The other thing I want to mention real quick is our YouTube channel. If you can take a few minutes and go over there and like and subscribe, we're starting to upload and update different movies and videos that we've done over the last year. And believe it or not, I think Paul and I are actually coming up on a year of doing broadcasts every Sunday night. Because didn't we start in October last year?
Okay. Do not be making me like you to start.
So we're coming up on a year, but anyhow, time flies when you're having fun. So you guys are just being too quiet tonight. It's like,
hey, I was going to jump in there.
As soon as the camera starts rolling, everybody gets really quiet. I don't know what the deal is.
But I'm waiting for you to take a breath.
Yeah, I'm in an honoring mood, so I'm just going to be mostly quiet tonight.
Honestly, I was gonna try to jump in there earlier. I did make 2 deliveries To Protect and Serve to 2 departments here in Central Texas over the weekend. So that's again great, and thanks to the folks that are making those donations.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's it's a great It's a great thing. It's nice to be able to actually give back and be able to encourage folks that way.
So,
For sure.
who were some of the contributors to that? Because you wrote the majority of the book, but there were some other contributors.
I went to a bunch of the folks that have been on the show. So John Lee O'Reilly, he wrote a chunk. Jim Howard contributed a piece to it. Simon, for Worship Security Association, he contributed a story to it. We had Tina Lewis Rowe. She actually wrote a cool story. So we've had different folks contribute. Matt Combs, actually, Matt wrote a short story on and really the purpose of it. And what's really cool is I had a church reach out to me this past week, and they said that they were in Central Ohio, and they said they wanted to purchase one for every officer in their precinct. And it's really cool because it goes through and it does a devotional, but in the back it has a section of encouraging stories from people that have been in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And then it has kind of a snippet of a story from a police chaplain that we all know and love, that occasionally hangs out with us on the show here.
Yeah. So that's actually a pretty interesting story that is most likely going to become the first chapter of a book called Beside the Badge. And so I'm really excited about that. We owe Simon the name of that book because I was talking to him about the fact that I have a book in me, and at some point I'm going to write a book about my time as a chaplain and what God's shown me and how much I love doing that. And he's like, stop right there. Beside the Badge. You just said it, that's the name of a book. So I love where God's taking it. If you'd have told me a year ago that James would be like, cranking out books every other Tuesday. It's amazing to watch what God is doing with that.
It's not every other Tuesday, although I would be amiss if I didn't say that we're looking at a fourth project right now. I'm just going to say that really got pushed from Dan Blevins. So Dan, if you're listening, it's your fault. I blame you.
Yeah, church safety and chocolate coming out around Valentine's Day. So.
For sure. So if you're joining us tonight, welcome. Go ahead and put down what state you're listening from and what church, and we're going to jump right into it. So our special guest this evening has been on the show before, and somehow we managed to actually corral him back. I'm not really sure how we did that, other than he's just a really cool guy. So I'm going to bring Mr. Highfield back in. Larry, how are you this evening, sir?
Oh, doing wonderful. I appreciate the honor to be back.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you didn't get scared away the last time by Mr. Buckner, because we all know how intimidating he can be.
Well, he did promise to be quiet tonight.
This is true.
Yeah.
This is true. So for our new listeners, or the folks that maybe they didn't catch the last time you were on with us, can you just real quick go through your background and tell us a little bit about your interesting and dynamic experiences?
Sure, why not? I've got 24 years in fire service. Dad spent 27 years in. I'm on my 13th year of teaching fire science technology at our local community college. I've been an emergency manager and spent 5 years on the ambulance and EMS and ER here in Springfield, Missouri.
Great.
Yeah, there's more to it than that, though, because you've worked alongside Homeland.
There's
some fire marshal, fire chief. So why don't you roll that a little bit too?
Okay. I've been a fire chief twice. Been an emergency manager once, and I'm also a CBRN instructor for DHS.
Okay, weren't you a fire marshal for a while, and you've done some investigation too?
I still am. Yeah, okay. I still keep that current. I have been a fire marshal for about the last 18 years. Yeah.
I thought I'm glad you said C. Bernie, because I thought you had said at one point that you did that with DHS as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cool. Well, thank you
great.
for spending some time with us this evening, and
Well, it's my pleasure.
and I'll send you the payment check to be our guest later after having to deal with Paul. But anyhow, so yeah,
I'll get my pointing right after a while.
we'll jump right into the topic. So
Okay.
we're talking about fire safety, and it's definitely a topic that doesn't get talked about too often from a church safety team perspective.
Right.
So how does the last time we kind of covered some basic stuff, and we will get into that tonight, but before we jumped into the broadcast, you were kind of talking a little bit about COVID and how that's impacting some of the things. So let's jump in there real quick, and then I'll turn it over to you, Mike, and we can kind of go from there. Okay. So how do you think with COVID, how do you think that's impacting churches with fire safety?
Well, we're having to deal with smaller numbers of parishioners, and no children's church, no nursery. So that takes a lot out of our equation. Now we just basically deal with one service, one group of people, and it's less than half of what we was used to dealing with. So trying to get those people lined out, our security team, we have one up front for executive protection and two in the back, and that's basically all we need right now. It has tremendously dropped our numbers in need, just for the simple fact of some are scared to come out. We are in a hot zone. Nobody likes it, but those that are out there do understand the risk. And so, they know where they're supposed to go, when they're supposed to do it, whenever we say it's time to do this.
For sure. Yeah, we've brought back some of our kids' ministries, and so that's kind of made us, from a safety team perspective, that's kind of made us adapt some of how we had things before. We still run at a bare minimum. So if we were to have like a fire emergency, I think we would be covered, and that would be great that we would have adequate coverage. But yeah, one of the things Paul just commented, we have seen an increase with churches not being occupied. We have seen an increase in arson and different things like that, where if a church, just because a church isn't having a church service, doesn't mean that, you don't keep an eye in the building or, go after it and make sure that everything is still okay.
Yeah. So, and the crime of arson, we haven't had it here, but I know, Paul, you have been posting quite a bit on different places. I'm at a point on the crime of arson where I'm not near as worried about insurance payment type arson as I am those people that are just ticked off at the church. There's plenty of those people. And we didn't know what we was going to run into whenever we finally opened our doors back up. We was on high alert for everything, because there are some people that swear to Betsy that the church should not be open right now. And we've had plenty of those issues too. So we just watch those people.
For sure. Mike, I will go ahead and we'll flip it over to you. You had a couple of topics to jump into with Larry. So
sure. And thanks for coming on, Larry. So one of the things that, in case you haven't had a chance to take a look, I have been in emergency management myself, not as the primary manager. I've worked with Homeland Security. I've done some tabletop exercises where we've done active threat integrated response, where we brought in fire and EMS alongside police in an active threat situation. So been through some of that. But that being said, one of the programs that I helped put together and introduce to folks in the church around fire safety is what I call the 5 Ps. So I'll kind of show them real quick and then kind of unpack them what I mean by that.
Sure.
So perimeter, proximity, personality, proper storage, and policy. And so this is kind of where I've kind of relayed to folks with that. So perimeter, we'll start there. Certainly around our buildings, we're talking about arson and opportunity, but we want to look at trees that are too close to the building, piles of twigs, old pallets, trash that's not being picked up on time, light fixtures that could get broken or short out, or things like that. That's kind of what I call and loop into perimeter. Crimes of opportunity or neglect, frankly. Proximity is more about fire extinguishers and having them in proximity to where you might be likely to need them. You don't want the single fire extinguisher that you have in your church to be in the kitchen with the grease fire. And I think it's just having them in the right places and making sure that that's key. Personality is more about the fact that we're dealing with people. People have different sorts of quirks. So whether that be a smoker, and so you got cigarette butts being tossed into the grass while it's dried out here in Central Texas, or whether that's just carelessness around open flame or kitchen or other sorts of combustibles or things like that. Proper storage ties right into that, is making sure those flammable items are stored properly. Some of our churches don't have sheds or garages or things like that, so they're keeping the weed whacker and the fuel and other sorts of things probably where they shouldn't be. So that's kind of proper storage. And finally, policy is having policy around everything from your staff space heaters for those that are up north and in the cooler areas, to how are you going to handle open flame when you have it. Not all of us are using candles on a regular basis, but certain denominations do.
Sure.
And then certainly, I think tie in the location we said of those fire extinguishers, but having a policy around that, making sure that, all right, are you bringing in somebody from the outside? Are you required by your local policy and laws to have them inspected on a regular basis? And do you have the proper fire extinguishers for the job?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this morning, I'm not even thinking I was going to be on tonight. I actually checked our extinguishers to make for sure that they have been properly inspected. We do have a third party here in Springfield. We have several third parties, but the one that we use has been checking all of that. They've been checking the sprinkler systems. They've been making sure that there's no discrepancies. Unfortunately, in our area, our Springfield fire marshals have not been, let's say, active. Okay. They have not inspected a building since COVID started. Oof. And so it's on us to make for sure that we're within compliance. And that way, when they do actually get back out, we don't have an issue, because we have to police ourselves.
Sure.
And, you know, it's unfortunate, but I can understand their issues at the same time. You know, not that I chose to be in a hot spot, but I am. And so, you know, we just deal with whatever we have to do. In emergency management and fire service and military, adapt, improvise, overcome. Okay? So if nobody's going to take care of it, we have to. Sure. And, you know, I did check our fire extinguishers this morning. They was checked last month. I'm grateful for that. We got some discrepancies on our sprinkler system over in another part of our area that there was some code issues. They took care of it. Now we're waiting on reinspection. As far as perimeter goes, we have a lawn service that takes care of keeping everything away from the building. We make for sure that there's nothing hiding in a fire hydrant. Everything has been restriped since we've been out for this short period of time. And that makes it good. What we wanted to do when we reopened our church was to make people feel comfortable. And if they felt comfortable coming to our church, then they felt comfortable with actually sitting and listening to the Word of God.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to jump on real quick, and then I'll shoot it over to Paul to see if he had anything. The bit that you mentioned about personal responsibility, I love that, because just because a company or a contractor or a municipal worker hasn't been out there doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to ensure that the building is operational and that we're good. So, take it upon yourself to do a quick walkthrough. If you have fire extinguishers, check out your fire alarm system, make sure things are not, preferably not during a service, but take a look at it, make sure it's operating, make sure you understand how your system in your building operates and works.
Right.
Because I think I've joked about this before, but I decided that I didn't know enough about our system at my church. Our system covers 150,000 square feet. And so I went and downloaded the manual, and it's like 300 pages in a PDF from Honeywell. Yeah. And I'm sitting here flipping, page by page, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to die before I finish reading all of this. But what was interesting was I learned, as painful as it was, I learned a lot. And I learned that instead of, when the fire alarm's running, or when the fire alarm's going off and everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off, I can go over to the panel box, open it, and see exactly what's going on and know what's going on, because I know how to decipher the codes on the box now. And I can say, okay, this is the area. Let's evacuate this portion of the building until it's confirmed. And that helps me not only test our response and our reaction, but it also helps me instruct other folks on my team to say, okay, go to the box, look at this, see what needs to be done, and then, go from there.
Right. And the other part of our security team are not firefighters.
Sure.
So guess who gets to go check out the box? Yeah. And we not only have one panel, but we have two panels, because not only is our campus a church, we also have a mansion, the old Elfindale Mansion. If anybody ever wants to look that up, that actually has guests staying in it that don't attend our church.
Interesting.
And so we have a panel in the mansion, and we have a panel in the church. And we do have a tunnel to get through, and to where nobody even knows we're there. But we have to make for sure that we maintain both systems.
Right.
And we get alerted on either one of them if they have an issue.
That's actually how ours is set up. It's the old portion of the building is actually on one panel, and it's connected to another. So we actually have two piggyback panels, basically. So yeah, sometimes it's kind of interesting understanding, or completely understanding how to reset those and run through all of that fun stuff as well. But there's still a lot, and we're not, a lot of churches, we've talked to churches regularly where they're not back to 100% yet, but the reality is there's always stuff that you can be doing. There's always plenty of stuff that you can look at, and now's a good time to make sure, go back through. If you think that your church is opening in the next couple of weeks, go back through and check the fire exits, for goodness sake. Because a lot of times with, because, in churches, we love to pile stuff up in front of exits that nobody's using. And kind of go from there. So, Mike, did you want to add anything before we go to a quick break?
Interestingly enough, I grew up in a house that had a tunnel that was attached to another facility, and so I know that feeling of being able to go back and forth between the buildings, which is interesting. So, just an anecdote off the side, but I think it was kind of funny to hear that from another But maybe one thought would be is, Larry, perspective on beyond the perimeter wildfires. We're seeing parts of the country certainly impacted heavily again at this point. So I'm wondering your thoughts on what churches who might be in those zones could do to further mitigate.
Well, we do have a 30-foot rule in wildland. Anything within 30 foot that can burn needs to be gone. And 30 foot in some of the higher pine areas or taller tree areas, 50 foot's good. And just make for sure that you have all your ground clutter gone, no leaves, no pine needles, no trees that are extending over the church itself, and keep it all clear. It looks beautiful no matter what. But a lot of our churches in this southern Missouri area have actually taken that into account and kept clear grass back at least 100 feet.
Uh-huh.
So, but there are churches that are built in the middle of nowhere that do have to worry about that 30 or 50 foot rule. Because we're dealing right now with wildland fires in California, Nevada. Last I heard, it was only 7% contained.
Uh-huh.
So if you're dealing with 7% contained, how fast is that fire actually moving towards your church?
Uh-huh.
And the higher uphill, the worse it gets.
For sure. Things I know that you've mentioned this in the past, but I think last time we had you on, Paul asked a question about how quick something can catch fire and ignite, and when you're talking about more modern equipment, like in a steel building or a building that maybe is really old or smaller church building. Let's talk about that for folks for just a second. So.
Sure.
With some of the newer materials that we're using, I know, like in my home was built back in 2007, and I don't have 2x4s. I've got aluminum, aluminum studs throughout my house. What is something? I mean, an average structure fire. Well, and that's kind of a hard question to ask, but an average structure that catches on fire with newer materials, what are we looking at as far as timeline with response and stuff?
Response-wise, you're looking at a minimum of 5 minutes. And that's if the fire department's right around the corner. Okay.
Sure.
And by the time you realize what's going on, you call 911, they get the information they need. A lot of the enhanced 911s now have GPS tracking to where they can find out where you're at. So they can start sending a crew that way. During the daytime, you have 1 minute to get to the truck. At night, you have 2 minutes to get to the truck. And then you have drive time.
Uh-huh.
So a minimum, at bare minimum, 5 minutes. If you're in a rural area with an ISO of, say, 4 or 5, which is really good for a rural area, you'll be looking at a minimum of 10 minutes. By that 10-minute time, your house can be fully engulfed and going through the roof. Yeah. A lot of things, you mentioned you've got the metal studs and like that. What do you have around the outside of your house? Do you have any tree mulch or anything like that going around any of the gardens?
Mm-mm.
You're lucky, because we use a lot of tree mulch around here.
Sure.
And those
I know people do. I don't typically. I try and usually, like, I keep stuff trimmed back away from the house and that sort of thing. But
right. And we have people that are smokers that don't go to the proper smoking areas. They'll toss a butt right out in the middle of that tree mulch, and lo and behold, you got a smoldering fire sitting there just waiting to take up. We had a McDonald's down the road here, all metal construction, but that tree mulch, somebody flicked a cigarette out in it, and it ended up going through the ephes and burning up and totaled out the McDonald's. And we can have that same situation here at a church too.
Oh, absolutely. Mike, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to even carry it even a step further for some of these departments. So I was in a town before I moved here to Texas, and we were the largest fully on-call department in the state of Massachusetts. And so we had a full-time chief, but he was not always full-time, if you know what I mean. And so that just added to the response time. I mean, you're talking anywhere from 8 to 11 minutes, depending on what part of town, because again, once the 911 comes in and then they're toning that out for the call department, many of those folks are there in town or working at different businesses, and so they're jumping in their private vehicles and they're getting there.
Yep.
But you got to get the truck to the scene. So
Right.
usually it's first on scene is identifying is it just a faulty alarm, which happens very often, or is there something more involved? And then they may tone it out to a larger call.
Yep.
For sure. Paul, you were going to say something?
Just really quickly, Larry, you understand how rural it gets out here. I live outside of town, and I've only ever had one fire in the 17 years I've lived here. Knock on wood, that got away. And I was actually fighting it, called it in, and the wind had shifted and gone from like negligible to pretty good clip out of nowhere. It wasn't in the forecast or anything, and was burning over to my neighbor's property. And I got a response 40 minutes later of a brush truck. Now, for those that don't know what this is a pickup truck with a little
water tank
with a little stock tank on the back of
150 gallons.
Yeah. And there's a little generator that's supposed to fire up and start running this thing. And the guy's like, vrr, vrr, vrr. Well, I guess we'll have to do it by hand. And I almost had it out. It was down to like, sip your iced tea, pour the rest of it on the fire. And he's like, you should think about joining the fire department. You did a good job of containing this. And I'm like, praise the Lord, because otherwise we'd have lost everything.
And Paul, I know where you live, and I understand that completely. And we can even talk about that more after the break, because there are more ways to put out a fire than just water.
Sure.
There are.
Well, let's take a quick break. We'll jump over to some of our sponsors for the hour, and then we'll be right back. So hang out with us, guys. We'll be right back with you.
As believers, we place our faith in God for protection. But we must also take personal responsibility to keep our communities and families safe. Violence knows no boundaries. It's in our schools, our places of work, and even our places of worship. Now more than ever, we must awaken to today's threats and realities and do what we can to plan, prepare, and protect. That's why we created the Worship Security Association, an online video training resource to equip people just like you to learn how to protect your church. By joining WSA, your church will gain unlimited access to our growing library, which includes interviews with security experts, the latest information from safety conferences, and unique presentations designed to unlock your ministry's potential. Now is the time to plan, prepare, and protect.
All right. Take a quick break. So we're back. And if you just joined us, we are actually talking about fire safety with Larry Heifel. Larry joined us the beginning of the year, actually. He's been on before. And so we appreciate you coming back and putting up with our nonsense a little bit. So we were just talking about, you had mentioned putting a fire out, and we were talking about response time. And, honestly, I mean, I grew up in a rural community, and actually just north of where Mike lived in Massachusetts. And, honestly, when that's absolutely right. I mean, to have a 15-minute response time for the fire department was a fantastic thing. And, you would know how serious it was by, when your pager went off, if you looked at the sky and saw smoke, and you would, and I'm not making light of it. It's an unfortunate emergency, but at that point, it's almost like, okay, the first trucks that are rolling up on the scene are already striking a first alarm. And, at that point, it's those trucks are actually protecting it from spreading and not really putting the fire itself out.
Right. Yeah.
Which, again, that's over the years. One of the things, New Hampshire and Massachusetts has seen a little bit of this, but in New Hampshire, we're a tax-free state. Our tax base is on income tax, or not income tax, I'm sorry, property tax. And so with that, all of the equipment, for the fire department, EMS, police, et cetera, it's all based on if the voters will actually pass, a certain funding thing. So, it's not unusual. One of the fire departments I served with, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, they got a new to them ambulance, and it was still, I think, 15 or 20 years old. But it was in good shape, and they bought it and repurposed it. So, often the equipment that we deal with in a rural area isn't, we're not talking about, state of the art, high tech equipment that like Columbus or, one of the, another main city would have, per se. But
well, and James, I'll tell you right now, there's 2 things that any church can have in their whole prospectus of equipment without having to worry near as much about the fire department. Okay, on a wildland fire, there's only 2 things you need, and one of them is not water, Paul. Yeah, a leaf rake and a leaf blower.
Nice.
Believe it or not, most wildland fires are put out with a leaf rake and a leaf blower. We've always blown back into the black and pushed that fire back in where it's already burnt. Mm-hmm. What's it going to do?
Yeah.
And if you go ahead and rake those leaves and that brush and all that's close, like Mikey was talking about perimeter, get it back into the black. It's not going to hurt a thing. And you know what that black's going to end up doing next year? Turning more green. Yeah.
I was cutting the fire as it burned. It was burning kind of like in a flying wedge. And I was just going up the side of it, praying, and I was stomping and whacking with a rake. And I was going along it. And it must have looked really funny to watch me out there.
I would have paid for it.
I'm sure it was funny. I absolutely reeked, and I probably ruined a pair of boots, but it wasn't that it was this huge fire, but it was burning quickly in short field style grass. And I was like, that 400 feet from where it got loose was my neighbor's propane tank. And I'm like, nope.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And basically the water is just to cool that propane tank down. Yeah. And that's all it's going to do.
Yeah. You, Larry, earlier you were going to mention putting a fire out, and there's other things to use besides water. So let's go back to that real quick.
Okay.
This is the fun science stuff.
Why, sure it is. If you've got a kitchen fire going on, how about a lid? Mm-hmm. Let's exclude the oxygen. How about some baking soda? Don't throw flour on it. That can create a bigger disaster. If you got baking soda, a lid, anything to oxygen exclude, then you're in better shape. Whatever you do, if you have a pan and a kitchen fire going on and you have grease, don't throw it over into the sink and turn the water on, because all that does is throw the flames everywhere. Yeah. And, in a commercial kitchen, you'll have what they call a Class K, or a potassium-based exclusion. If these go off, don't breathe. I'll tell you right now, do not breathe. They're cooking oil fires, and that's what the Class K has been. Class K has been actually separated and made its own new class back about 10, 12 years ago. Used to be a Class C fire. Now it's a Class K. Cooking oils all by themselves. Okay, so it was a whole new class in extinguishers and like that. A lot of times you could use an ABC or your flammable materials, your combustible, and then your oils or your petroleum based. And then C got divided, and your Class K or your potassium-based extinguishers were properly made just for cooking fires.
So what's with potassium that it would make it more dangerous?
Well, your potassium is actually what puts the fire out.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the extinguishing agent. There are several different potassium-based extinguishing agents depending on the size of area that you're trying to cover. Are you trying to cover one fryer, two fryers, a cooktop, and all these hoods? We only have one place in the state of Missouri that actually can certify a commercial cooking hood, and they're based out of St. Louis, Missouri. So they stay busy all the time just checking out new different types of hood systems. Even our sprinkler companies around here won't touch hood systems.
Interesting. So shifting gears a little bit, we have, and I'll just use my church as an example. We have fire extinguishers. We have, we have trauma bags. We have first aid kits spread out throughout the church. From a fire perspective, what are some of the things that you would suggest us putting together, like maybe in a kit, whether it be gloves, rope, like maybe a fireproof blanket? What type of thing would you look at and say, you know what, this would be really beneficial?
Well, I would, the fireproof blankets are basically used for your wildland firefighters in a no-win situation. We call them the wrapper to the baked potato, because basically if they have to actually get in that and they're surrounded by fire, basically that tells us where their body is. Okay. Oh, it's terrible. It is terrible, but it gives them the slightest bit of chance to actually survive.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not good. Paul, you was asking about the flour.
Yeah.
Flour, if you look at some of the industrial accidents in some of these processing plants, flour turns into a fine, fine dust, just like grain mills. The fine dust, we have historically seen where these fine dusts will actually explode once they get caught up in a fire. They are a rapid acceleration of the fire, which in turn creates an explosion. And everything is based off of TNT. TNT equals 1. We've had a couple of flour mill incidents where the TNT level was upwards of 8 times that. Yeah. And so just the dust itself in flour or grain can create an 8 times larger explosion than one stick of TNT. Yeah.
I have a nephew that almost died in it was some kind of a grain elevator setup, and they were welding it, and they sent a guy down to spray down the entire area to knock the dust down. Right. And he didn't do it. He was summarily fired because he came out and said he did. Yeah. And they had, I don't understand the layout, but there was something going horizontally underground, some kind of a shaft. and then over some type of high-rise setup with it. I never did see a picture or anything, but he stuck his head down in there to yell at one of the welders, and right as they struck up, it's like boom, and flame went around his head, burned his hands, burned his head. He came out of it pretty good, because it could have killed him like that. And the two guys down inside got tore up pretty bad.
Right. And, the nice part about it was he came out of it alive.
Yeah.
Because most people do not survive that. Yeah. But you can Google search flour mill explosions, grain bin explosions, and you'll find several that have been out there. And, I have a few that I actually talk about in my fire science class on hazmat and fire 1 and 2, that, kicks them in gear and goes, oh, wow, this is real. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure. So if somebody wanted to set something up, say, as a preventative measure, I guess, like a couple of times I've thought about, like, I've had churches come up to me and they've said, hey, until the fire department gets here, we want to invest in like bunker gear, coats, stuff like that, gloves, that sort of thing. I mean, is that stuff really necessary if you're not like trained on how to use it or know what you're doing?
No, it takes 9 months to train a firefighter how to actually put on their turnout gear and be proficient at it.
Sure.
And you're not going to have volunteers that want to do that. What I would tell each and every one of those churches is know your escape routes and get out. Let the professionals handle it. Because you're not going to do anything but take a risk. And if the fire department shows up and they're pulling their lines and like that, and they realize someone's still in there, we risk a little to save a little. We risk a lot to save a lot. So we don't know whether you're still alive or not. And so we're going to risk a lot to get in there and get you.
And that's actually a good segue to Mike wanted to talk about like escape routes and planning and stuff like that. But we and I've used this illustration before, but one of the things that we've noticed at our church is that we did the escape routes a long time ago, and fire hydrants went in, other things built up and grew around us, responses changed, departments changed, etc. And so we actually, I think it was the beginning of this year, we went back and we revisited the idea of doing a fire drill and evacuation points and looking at everything. And much of what we found was original places that we had sent people to go. People would actually have to either cross in front of an arriving fire truck or walk across a water line that, they were trying to set up. So we had to go back and kind of say, wait a second, let's use some common sense here. Where are the hydrants? Where are good escape points? And Mike, I'll throw that over to you. You were going to jump in.
Sure. I think knowing your evacuation routes, I think was an important point that I wanted to talk about as well. Is I think that's one of the things I think a lot of the volunteers, since we have churches that are so volunteer heavy, and they may or may not even volunteer in the same classroom every time they're on. The idea of planning and putting together evacuation routes from each occupied area of your building. So, for example, I'll use my church. We have multiple kids' rooms. We have an upstairs. We have a downstairs. We have different offices. We have break areas for the volunteers. And so for that, is looking at, first, the entire facility and saying, where are the fire extinguishers? Where are the exits? That's the first and foremost. But then starting to look at evacuation maps for each room and saying specifically that says, if you're in this kid's room, your primary egress is this way. Follow the map. Here's how you get out to this exit. If you need to, here's your secondary route. If your primary becomes obstructed, if people are already using it, if the fire is in its path, etc., this is your secondary route. But the idea also is that not every route may be able to handle the total number of people that may be using it at a given time, is that you need a secondary route. So for me, it's a matter of putting together a map of the facility, the primary and secondary routes, the location of the fire extinguishers, the AED, all the other sorts of equipment, and mounting that in the wall of each classroom so that
Yes.
those volunteers can then know it.
Well, and we do that in the hotel motel industry. On the back of your door, as you close it, what do you see right there? Besides the rates if you tear up the place, you also see an evacuation route.
Right. Well, and we've gotten, I mean, honestly, we've gotten to the point where we've gone through and we do drills where we'll say, okay, you know, I'll walk into a classroom and I'll say, where's your fire evacuation point? If the fire alarm goes off right now, where are you going? What are you doing? And that'll be on a random Sunday. And that doesn't, you know, that kind of, you know, a lot of times people be like, oh, stop it, you're fooling around. And I'm like, but you need to know,
Right.
you know, we had one Sunday a couple months ago, actually, I think it was the end of last year. We had a damper get stuck on the HVAC system in our kids department, and it started smoking and allowing, I think what it was actually one of the belts on one of our motors was smoking and it was blowing in and the damper got stuck. And it was just like this, you know, I don't know, perfect storm. But the fire alarm went off. And only 2 kids left the entire church building, 150,000 square feet. Only 2 people left the building and went to a fire safety area. And do you know who those 2 kids were?
Yours?
Yeah,
Yours. Yeah.
mine. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, you know, and the 2 of them were arguing back and forth because they were like, well, Dad didn't say we were doing a fire drill. And the other one was like, but he didn't say we were doing a fire drill. That's the reason that we need to leave. And go out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think, you know, just walking in, besides actually doing a fire drill, just walking in and saying, do you know where the evacuation point is? Like, how are you going to handle it when you leave is enough to get people thinking and say, okay, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And this is how I'm going to handle, you know, herding 20 kids out to this point and keeping them accountable or keeping track of the kids and making sure that while we're out at that evacuation point that nobody tries to come and pick up their kids. That's right. You know, the other side of that safety.
And that's where we set up our security guys to make for sure that one goes out with nobody but children's church. And then they're on high alert. We also have our ushers that are supposed to surround them and make for sure that no one tries to get to them. We have a sticker system. And if that person says, oh, I'm supposed to take them in case of fire, no, let's get the right parent here or the right person that's supposed to be handling them. You know, right now we're under what I call the minimalistic system. Because we are only doing one out of the 2 services. We don't have the children's church going on. We don't have the nursery happening. So we've got everybody in one room right now. So the parents are with the children. But what happens whenever we actually do get back to full run? You know, we need to be thinking about that now.
Sure.
While we're not pushed for it.
And this is honestly, and I'll throw it over to Mike, but this is the best time to be talking about this stuff because, you know, you have an opportunity to make an adjustment or change now that you're not running full staff and then full, you know, tilt on all the services. And then when everything comes back, being able to say, you know, okay, we made some tweaks. You know, we're learning, we're changing, we're adjusting things accordingly. But that gives you the opportunity. Mike, you were gonna.
Yeah, one last thought is in not just in a fire response, but assisting any responders arriving at your property. I know, James, you have a large property. We're we're occupying a building that we don't use all of the building itself. It's an old movie theater with multiple parts of that building. Is labeling the exterior doors. So we've created a labeling system that not only our safety team internally is aware of on the map where every door is, but we set it up so that if we need a law enforcement, EMS, fire response, we're actually announcing to the 911 which door is the best door for the fastest response. And so it's just a simple alphanumeric system. So we're going around that. Basically, we have first floor and second floor doors. So we're going alpha around the perimeter and numerical for 1 and 2. So if you're Bravo 2, it's a second story door on the B side.
Right.
The other cool thing about that too, Mike, we actually just did that on the outside of our building, and surprisingly, we had people that came to us and they were like church members, and they're like, well, we don't have that many doors. We actually have 21 doors on the outside of our church building. And so, you can just see the dispatch, see the battalion chief arriving. His mind blows when he pulls into the parking lot and he's like, which door am I supposed to go to? But one of the things to that point is that, and we're still in the process of doing this, is actually putting a reflective letter on the inside as well. And the reason for that is because if there's smoke, or if you're trying to get out and you don't know what door you're at, it's very easy for you to look up and say, oh, this is door E. Okay, right. 911, I'm at door E and I need help. Or, maybe you're doing CP, which, has happened before. You have a medical emergency and you're on the phone with 911 and trying to, because your sense of direction and distance at that point, especially if you just ran across the church, is going to be very minimal.
Right.
And your adrenaline's going to be through the roof. So you're trying to remember what door am I at? Where am I? And all that fun stuff. So,
and it may not just be something that you want to put up top. If they're below smoke cover, it may be better to have it lower on that door. I've actually always wondered why for code, you got the signs for exit, which is great. People can see them, and then they're lit and above the door. Well, if you're below smoke, you're not necessarily seeing that exit anyway. Why not glow in the dark strips across the door so that when you're trying to find your exit, you can find the door?
And below smoke is less than 3 feet. Yeah.
So Oompa Loompa and under. Got it.
Yes. Yes.
So our charades this evening are brought to you by Mr. Buckner as he's going through.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, though. It's things like that we don't think about that can save lives, though, because you're right. I have watched smoke roll out of a building. Larry, you and I have talked about this. I watched a wide trailer burn down in 8 minutes.
Right.
I mean, it was burning at this end, and then it was all the way at the other end, and it burned it like a cigarette. It burned it all the way down, and I was actually impressed. And this is something that James, I think you're working on getting his previous video. If you guys have not seen the first video with Larry, this is really good stuff, because he talks about vehicle fires, and we talk about fires in parking lots, and we talk about a lot of little things in there. Things like, if you don't have a master key set that you can hand to a set of firefighters, they will break every door in the building looking for the. So if you don't want to have to fix every door in the building, it might be a good idea to have a set of master keys. And there's a lot of stuff he talks about in that first video about electrical cars and fires and slipping gears and rolling and what these things are made of. So I won't belabor that, but I think we're going to try to get that video back up where you guys can see that later in the week, because it's really good stuff. And then we've been kind of chatting in the background about maybe next year bringing Larry back and maybe talking about hazardous spills. And I go to church near an interstate, but I used to go to church next to a railway. And we all know that largely big time hazardous things go up and down those roadways. And I know they teach law enforcement the rule of thumb. If you can't cover the scene of the situation with your thumb, you're too close. And
that's right.
I mean, that's kind of a little bit funny, but kind of seriously not funny.
Right.
So, James, are we about ready to wrap up, or?
Yeah, I would definitely say thanks again, Larry. We'll definitely have to have you back and talk about that. And Paul, if you want to go ahead and shut us down, we'll We'll
Yeah,
close with
I
prayer.
had one quick comment. We'll definitely close in prayer. I love the fact that you guys are all talking about training for these things, because it's been proven time and time again with mass shootings, with fires, with damage to buildings, that people will tend to run out when they panic the exit they came in, and that may not be viable. So Mike, you talked about this, and Larry, you talked about this, and James, you talked about this. This is so important. This is why we teach tornado drills and fire drills to little children, but we're not teaching it to the big children that we go to church with a lot of the time. Right.
Just look at the nightclub station fire
Yeah.
in Rhode Island. That is the best case of understanding where people are taking that primary exit. There are people, unfortunately, literally died 3 feet from an exit that they could have used. And that wasn't just trampling and things like that. It's just because it wasn't labeled well enough, because they didn't have the fire extinguishers, because there was a lot of negligence involved across that. But that can happen in a church just as easily.
Yeah.
Well, and just taking the time and running through. I mean, we've done that in the past and had like a fire drill and stuff, and realized that, okay, we need to have like our safety team. We have like I'm the safety team director. There's assistant directors. We have a leadership team. Those leadership team individuals have specific roles now. We went through and we role played everything, and we said, okay, when you clear, when everybody's leaving the building, you're the last person to go through and check every closet, every doorway, every hideaway, everything, so that when I walk up to you, or when the fire chief walks up to you and says, hey, what's going on, you can say that's cleared, and I know that's cleared. And so that really just open just by running through the drills and the scenarios, even when nobody's there. I mean, you don't have to have a lot of people to do that. That gave us the opportunity to see where our shortcomings were in handling a large, mass casualty situation, and saying, okay, and I threw out, at one point okay, so you've got a parent that's running from the sanctuary to get to their kid in the kids area, to get their kid because of what's going on. Now you've got a combatant parent in the middle of you trying to evacuate and get everybody out. How are you going to handle that? And, several of the people said to me, I would have never thought about that. And I said, you know what? I said, if we're parents, you're going to think about that. Like, I need to get to my kid. I need to make sure my kid's safe for my responsibility, not someone else's.
Right.
So, it puts when you run through those drills and even just do a tabletop or talk about it, it gives you the opportunity to kind of see where a shortcoming might be and adjust accordingly. And that right there, as Mr. Buckner always says, is worth the price of admission.
I would rather be embarrassed in training. I would rather bleed in training. I would rather be yelled at. I don't really like getting yelled at, but I would rather get yelled at in training than in a real life scenario go, I'm dead. That's not cool. And I don't want to live with the fact that I didn't do something right. So you guys are all right. When you go through all these training scenarios, I'd rather figure those things out beforehand. And I don't know how many times you walk around your church and you're doing a little bit of a fire safety check, and you look and somebody's put a pew in the emergency exit hallway. This happened at my church and at my last church, and it's a handicap accessible, or it was, hallway. Now you can't get a wheelchair out. Oh, we're not going to have a fire.
Really?
Like, I love you. You want to be responsible for the fact that grandma can't get out in her wheelchair? And then you see them go, oh, well no. So, all right, gents, any closing remarks before I close in prayer?
Nope.
No, it's been a pleasure, guys. I greatly appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, Larry.
Hey,
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, I thank you for tonight, the opportunity to talk with experts about things that can save lives, Lord God. And this is an area that's very much outside my wheelhouse, so I enjoy the expertise. I enjoy that iron sharpens iron aspect, and I thank you for Mike, for James, for Larry being on the show tonight. Lord God, I ask that this would reach the right ears, that people would hear it, they would see it, they would share it with their teams, they would realize that these things right now, the stuff that we're talking about, is way more likely to happen than an active shooter. And all of these things are also equally applicable to medical, getting people out that may be injured during those times, and getting with the marked doors. Lord God, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for the things that we've learned, and I just ask that you keep our churches safe as we come back together to worship in your Son Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks for hanging out with us tonight, guys. And like I mentioned before, if you have a chance and you can get over to the YouTube channel, like and subscribe. If you go on to the Church Safety Guys Facebook page and like and subscribe to that, then you'll get notifications when we do a live video. And that kind of tells you when we have stuff going on. And pretty soon we'll be changing that up. Our next season actually starts the beginning of September. We'll be taking Labor Day weekend off. But next week we actually have a special broadcast Sunday night with some interesting folks you won't want to miss, and definitely some fun training stuff. So thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you all next week.